Vas a ir.
All right. So should I just go ahead and put up my slides now, or do you have some things
If
to
I may
share?
introduce you, I'd like to do that.
Okay.
So I want to say good morning to everyone who's with us and welcome you all today. This is our first NIDA Grant Learning Collaborative. And we are recording today's session because we had some folks who weren't able to attend. I'm Carly Searcy. I'm project manager for ICU DDR, the International Consortium of Universities for Drug Demand Reduction. I think all of you know me, but I will put my email address in the chat box in case you'd like to contact afterwards for any follow-up. And it has been my pleasure to work on our NIDA mini grant project. So with the NIDA funded mini grants, our goal is to begin to address the gap in research literature on substance abuse in low and middle income countries. We know that gap has a negative impact, not just on low and middle income countries and their citizens, but also the rest of the world. We're missing potential findings that can be applied in other settings and may improve efficiency and effectiveness of care in many or all countries. So today our topic is understanding the NIDA grant process, and we are delighted to have a guest, Dr. Jennifer Hoban, who is NIDA's Director of the Office of Science Policy. Dr. Hoban, thank you so much for your time today, for sharing your expertise. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me. And good to see you all. If not your faces, your names. I'm going to go ahead and try to share my screen here and see if I can do this correctly. Are you seeing my slides?
I am.
Okay, great. So now I'm just going to try to switch them to presenter mode. Let's see. Okay, so you should be seeing them in presenter mode.
Yes, looks perfect.
Okay, great. So as Carly said, I'm Jennifer Hoban. I'm the Director of the Office of Science Policy and Communications here at the National Institute on Drug Abuse. And I also manage NIDA's international program along with my colleague, Dr. Lindsay Friend. My role is in managing all of the international policy and stakeholder engagement work, including helping connect researchers such as yourself to NIDA research and opportunities. And Dr. Friend is managing the NIDA international training opportunities. I won't spend a lot of time on the training program today, but I do have some backup slides. So if you end up having questions about that, I'm happy to talk about that as well. So for those of you who aren't familiar with NIDA, NIDA is one of the 27 institutes of the US National Institutes of Health. The NIH, as we call it, is the world's largest biomedical research funding organization. Within NIH, NIDA's mission is to advance science on the causes and consequences of drug use and addiction, and to apply that knowledge to improve individual and public health. And we do that in part through funding research on all aspects of drug use and addiction. So this slide, which is a representation of the 2022 to 2026 strategic plan that we currently have in development, gives an overview of the kinds of work that NIDA supports. We support research, as I said, on all aspects of substance use and addiction, from basic science research on the impacts of drugs on the brain and other areas of the body, epidemiologic research to understand trends in substance use and substance use disorder. We support the development and evaluation of interventions to prevent, screen for, and treat substance use and substance use disorder, research to spur the development of new tools and technologies for monitoring, preventing, and treating substance use. We also have a robust implementation and dissemination research science program aimed at translating drug use into research, aimed at translating drug use research into policy and practice. And we support this work across all drug types with the exception of alcohol. There's another institute at the NIH, the National Institute on Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism, that focuses on alcohol research. But we touch all other drugs here at NIDA. So I'm going to use this time to highlight a few of NIDA's research priorities, but this is not at all a comprehensive list. So rather, I'm going to focus on the things that are sort of top of mind for us right now. So as I'm sure many of you are are aware, we are in the midst of a national drug overdose crisis in the United States, and a major focus of our work is aimed at developing solutions to this overdose crisis. In the last decade or so, we have seen a dramatic increase in drug overdose deaths in recent years. And these overdose deaths are driven primarily by synthetic opioids other than methadone. So this is primarily fentanyl and fentanyl-related substances. We've also seen increases in deaths involving other substances, psychostimulants. I don't know if you can see my pointer moving, but this is the gray line shows the sort of big increase we've had in psychostimulants involved overdose deaths. So that's primarily methamphetamine, but we've also seen increases in cocaine, as well as sort of more recently increases in benzodiazepine deaths. And I should note that many of these overdose deaths that, psychostimulants, cocaine, benzodiazepines also involve fentanyl-related substances, because the U.S. drug supply is highly contaminated with fentanyl currently. So in response to the U.S. Opioid overdose crisis, the National Institutes of Health, with the support of the U.S. Congress, launched a trans-agency effort to speed solutions to this crisis. So since its inception in 2018, NIH has invested over $2 billion in research aimed at addressing the opioid public health crisis. We've supported more than 600 individual research projects and issued 50 or so funding opportunity announcements. The NIH HEAL initiative is largely a domestic initiative, funding domestic research, but I wanted to talk about it today just because it's such a huge part of what we're doing. And I think the work that we're funding under HEAL is also kind of broad interest and importance. So HEAL is broken down largely into two main categories. There's a focus on enhancing pain management, and that component is largely led by our sister institute, the National Institute of Neurological Disorders and Stroke. And then the second half on the bottom of the slide is improving treatment for opioid misuse and addiction, and that's largely led by NIDA. But as I mentioned, this really is a trans NIH institute, so a number of other NIH institutes in addition to NINDS and NIDA are involved. HEAL is focused on developing novel medications for opioid use and overdose, enhancing outcomes for infants affected by opioid exposure, developing new prevention and treatment strategies, and a major focus on translating research into practice. So that last component, translating research into practice, is a major focus of HEAL. And one of the biggest studies under the HEAL initiative is the Healing Communities study. This study is aimed at testing the integration of evidence-based prevention and treatment interventions in 67 different communities across 4 states within the United States, with the goal of reducing opioid-related overdose deaths by 40%. So this study is testing the implementation of interventions that we already know work. So for example, overdose education and naloxone distribution, increasing access to and utilization of medications for opioid use disorder, and interventions aimed at decreasing high-risk prescribing. But again, the focus is understanding how we can implement them in diverse communities and what works to do so. Another major implementation project funded under HEAL, which also speaks to an important area of interest for NIDA, is the Justice Community Opioid Innovation Network. And this project is predicated on the vision that every individual involved in the justice system with a substance use disorder should have access to effective treatment, both while detained and when they re-enter into the community. JCOIN, as we call it, is funding over 60 or so studies aimed at generating new evidence about what works and how to effectively implement it in justice settings, developing a network of researchers collaborating with practitioners across justice and community-based service settings. It's positioning itself to become a go-to resource for researchers and practitioners, to build capacity to conduct and apply research in justice settings, all ultimately with the goal of speeding the translation of science to solutions and creating kind of feedback loops within that space. So another major focus of HEAL and NIDA efforts largely, even beyond HEAL, is to develop new treatments for opioid use disorder and overdose. And we are approaching that from a number of different perspectives. One is developing novel therapeutics to treat OUD. The other is new formulations of existing medications to treat OUD, developing longer duration formulations, including those that might be effective at counteracting opioid overdose. We're also supporting interventions for respiratory depression. And I should mention that our work is not just focused on medications, but also we support research on devices, brain stimulation devices, and other such projects aimed at treating opioid use disorder and in fact other substance use disorders. Given the role of fentanyl in the U.S. opioid overdose crisis and also in other areas of the world, a major question of interest is specifically on fentanyl. I mean, fentanyl is an opioid, but it doesn't necessarily act like other opioids. So questions of interest are how do we reverse fentanyl overdose? Do we need different strategies for fentanyl overdose than, for example, heroin? Should naloxone doses be higher? Are longer acting formulations of naloxone needed? Are there other medications or medication combinations that would be more effective? Other questions are, what are appropriate detoxification strategies for people experiencing fentanyl addiction? How do we treat fentanyl addiction? What about in pregnancy and postpartum? That's an important area of interest. And how do we treat fentanyl-involved neonatal abstinence syndrome? So again, this is not a comprehensive list of questions, but just to give you a sense of the breadth of the sorts of things that we're interested in. So shifting gears, I mentioned that we're seeing really unprecedented rises in stimulant-involved overdose deaths. Within the United States, there are no FDA-approved medications for stimulant addiction or overdose. So of course, that's different from opioid use disorder, for which we have 3 FDA-approved medications. And I apologize for the acronym, but for those of you who don't know, FDA is the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, and that's the regulatory body that approves drugs and devices. So there are no FDA-approved medications for stimulant addiction or overdose. We do have effective behavioral therapies, and we know that contingency management is particularly effective for stimulant use disorders, but unfortunately, they're very highly underutilized. So developing new medications for stimulant use disorders is a major priority for NIDA, and we're supporting a number of studies across the drug development pipeline, from preclinical research all the way to phase 2 trials to examine new treatments for stimulant use disorders, and that includes methamphetamine and cocaine. Cannabis research is also an important area of interest for NIDA, and we support research on the epidemiology of cannabis use and cannabis use disorder, research on prevention, including through our adolescent brain cognitive development study, which I'll tell you a bit more about later. Neuroscience research to understand the brain's endocannabinoid system, but also to understand the impact of cannabis and cannabinoid exposure on brain structure, function, cognition, motivation, and other aspects of adolescent health and development. We support research on the medical use of cannabis and cannabinoids, primarily for pain, substance use disorders, and HIV, which is an important area of interest for NIH. Research on the use of cannabinoids for other health conditions are largely supported by other NIH institutes and centers. So for example, we have an NIH institute that focuses on cancer research, and they might do more work on the impact of cannabinoids on cancer-related conditions or cancer pain. We also support research on the treatment of cannabis use disorders, as well as policy research, examining different, for example, regulatory models for cannabis and cannabinoids. NIDA has a robust and long-standing interest in HIV research through our HIV, and this work is primarily focused on the intersection of HIV and drug use, because again, there is another NIH institute that the Allergy and Infectious Diseases Institute that sort of does the bulk of the HIV research for NIH, but lots of other institutes sort of participate as related to their mission space. So for us, we're interested in preventing research aimed at preventing new infections and the transmission of HIV among people who use drugs and their sexual and injection partners, increasing understanding of the etiology, pathogenesis, spread, and persistence of HIV/AIDS among people who use drugs, addressing comorbidities and improving health outcomes of people living with HIV who use drugs, as well as research to accelerate scientific discoveries in HIV/AIDS and substance use research sort of broadly. So switching gears, another important area of interest for NIDA is understanding infant and child brain development. So this includes research to understand normal brain and child development, as well as how that development is affected by drugs and other environmental exposures. So we're currently supporting 2 large longitudinal studies to this end. One is the Healthy Brain and Child Development Study, which we launched last year. This study is going to be following 7,500 infants from birth through ages 9 to 10 to understand normative neurodevelopment and assess the impact of exposures, including in utero exposure, because we're recruiting women during pregnancy. So in utero exposure to drugs and then other harmful environments. And then we are also supporting the Adolescent Brain Cognitive Development Study. So this study actually launched in 2015 and is well underway. It is following close to 12,000 children beginning at age 9 through 10. We'll be following them over 10 years into early adulthood to look again at factors that influence individual brain and cognitive development and other adolescent outcomes. So these studies are together going to yield an unprecedented amount of information on child health and development sort of over a 20-year span. And we'll be, I think with the ABCD study, the researchers are starting at ages 9 through 10, and that is going to help us understand, be able to look at the brains of these children for the most part before they start using any drugs, and then follow them throughout their teen years when kids might start using drugs and be able to understand what the impact of that is on their brain and development. I should note that that these data, the ABCD data, have been made available to both ABCD and non-ABCD investigators. And in fact, most of the publications that have come out of the ABCD study have been through use of the data by non-ABCD investigators. Preventing substance use and substance use disorder is another area of focus for NIDA. And we're supporting research on the social determinants of health to test interventions aimed at addressing social factors that play a role in substance use initiation. And the ABCD data are expected to be helpful in this regard. And NIDA is specifically exploring ways to connect the fields of epidemiology, developmental neuroscience, and prevention to improve the integration of those ABCD study findings into prevention intervention research. Through our prevention portfolio, we also support research to examine the role of policy in preventing substance use initiation and to test the implementation of policies to determine their impact on substance use, as well as services research to inform our understanding of prevention program implementation and enhance the capacity of systems to deliver prevention programs. Of course, over the last 2 years, research at the intersection of COVID and SUD has been a high priority. We know from research conducted or supported by NIDA, as well as other research, that people with substance use disorders are at increased risk of COVID and also worse outcomes from COVID infection. We've also seen how the pandemic has contributed to stress and stigma, limited access to treatment for substance use disorders, to peer support and recovery support, and generally to social connection. It's contributed to job losses, to housing instability, and to homelessness, not globally. And of course, this pandemic stress, this stress from all of these things, the loss of connection, job loss, housing instability, can be a risk factor for substance use and for substance use relapse in those who are in recovery. So this has been a high priority area for us, and we've supported over 100 studies related to COVID-19, covering topics like what are the effects of COVID-19 on people who use drugs? What are the effects of COVID-19 on brain development and behavior, including studies that are taking advantage of the ABCD and HBCD data that I mentioned earlier. We're looking at the impact of pandemic-related policy changes on access to SUD treatment. So within the United States, there were a number of policies implemented to, for example, make it easier to enable people to get access to SUD treatment in the context of, the shutdowns, and so, for example, there were policies making it easier to take methadone doses home, as opposed to requiring people to show up at the clinic every day. And there was an expansion of telehealth, right, to account for the fact that people weren't, it was harder for people to come to in-person visits in light of COVID. And so now we're supporting research to examine what the impact of some of those policy changes have been on access to SUD treatment. And we've also supported research to understand and address vaccine hesitancy in SUD. Harm reduction is another area of interest for NIDA. We have a long-standing, we've supported harm reduction research for quite some time, particularly with regard to work on syringe services programs, and more recently, in light of the opioid overdose crisis, naloxone distribution. But harm reduction is now one of the pillars of the HHS, that's the US Department of Health and Human Services, of which NIH and NIDA are a part. It's a part of the it's a pillar of the HHS overdose prevention strategy. And so in addition to continuing to support research on some of these long-standing harm reduction programs like syringe services programs and naloxone distribution, we're also interested in supporting research on emerging or newer harm reduction practices. These include things like drug checking, the use of fentanyl test strips for drug checking, and the use of research, for example, on overdose prevention centers, or you might know them by the term supervised injection sites. And so we issued a funding opportunity announcement under the HEAL initiative earlier this year to solicit research on both new and emerging harm reduction practices. And then I also want to mention stigma. Addressing the stigma that surrounds addiction has been a major focus of NIDA communication efforts really over the last several years. We know that stigma, including stigma by healthcare professionals, contributes to substance use, impedes the delivery of substance use disorder care, and can even limit access to non-substance use disorder care. So this has been an important key focus of our communications efforts over the last several years, including with a specific focus on engaging healthcare providers and on this topic, and helping to encourage the use of language that can help to sort of reduce or mitigate the stigma against people with substance use disorders and other mental health conditions. So switching gears a bit, I want to tell you about our international program specifically. So NIDA, it has been engaged on international efforts for quite some time, and there are a number of components to what we do on the international stage. We're engaged in international policy work, including collaborations with international agencies like the World Health Organization, the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime. We facilitate information exchange with the international research and training community through our website. We have an international e-newsletter that goes out that you can sign up for. We contribute to and participate in international meetings. And then, of course, we support international research and training efforts. In terms of our international research program, about 7% of NIDA grants support international research. So these include domestic grants with a foreign component, and that is the vast majority of the international work that we support. It accounts for about 91% of NIDA international research grants. So these are grants that are awarded to a US principal investigator, and the research may be conducted at US and foreign sites, and then the non-US principal investigator is supported according to various arrangements that may be in the grant application. So in addition to these domestic grants with foreign components, we do support a small number of direct foreign grants. And these are grants awarded directly to foreign principal investigators for research conducted outside the United States. These are relatively rare. So in FY21, we supported just 18 awards in 7 countries, and I think you can see them there. So just to give you a sense of the topics of our direct foreign grants, they're here. I know this is small, and I've color-coded them kind of roughly into like topics. So you can see that about a third of them are direct foreign grants on some HIV related topic. Those are the ones sort of in blue up here. We also support foreign grants on for training and mentoring, basic research. There's one here on zebrafish genetics, oxycodone metabolism, research on psychostimulants. Again, these are sort of more basic, neuroscience research, and then a number of grants here on various aspects of opioid use and opioid use disorder. Again, just to give you a flavor of the kinds of work we're supporting in direct grants right now. So NIDA international grants must offer special opportunities for furthering research through special opportunities that are not available in the United States. So this might be kind of unusual talent or resources or populations or environmental conditions that are not available in the US, but that are available in the awardee country. They must have specific relevance to the NIDA mission and objectives, and also the potential to advance US health sciences. And you can find out more information about international grants at this link here. And I think Carly will probably share the slides with you, or she certainly can. And so you should be able to just pull that link right off there. So we currently have a notice out to solicit international research. And the purpose here is to, and if you just Google this notice number here, DA 21064, you'll find it. But the purpose here is to encourage collaborative research applications that take advantage of opportunities outside of the United States. Applications examining all areas of NIDA supported research are encouraged, and again, including those with unusual opportunities outside the US. And this notice is to support newly formed or well-established partnerships between investigators in a US-based institution and scientists working in another country. And these are some of the grant mechanisms that are supported under this work. Sorry. So just to drill down on this program announcement a bit more, these are substances that are of high priority: cannabis, novel psychoactive substances, particularly synthetic opioids, including fentanyl, other opioids, including prescription opioids, heroin, psychostimulants, inhalants, and tobacco and nicotine. And then these are some of the specific broad topics of interest: basic research on neuroscience and biology, epidemiology, intervention and implementation research, policy research, recovery research, and linkages between HIV, AIDS, and drug use. And again, if you search for that grant announcement, you'll see details under each of these topics that give you a bit more information on the interests. And I also just wanted to mention the international forum. So each year, in collaboration with the annual College on Problems of Drug Dependence annual meeting. NIDA sponsors an international forum to build international collaborative research on substance use and addiction. This is a virtual conference that's going to be held June 9th and 10th, preceding the CPDD meeting. It's 2 morning sessions from about 8 a.m. to 12 p.m. US Eastern Time on each of those days. We will be having sessions on harm reduction, research and policy, university and addiction education in the age of COVID-19, integrity and transparency in drug treatment, the development of alternatives to conviction and punishment for people who use drugs, as well as a scientific networking opportunities. There'll also be a poster session, and the registration is now open, and there is no fee to attend this conference. So I hope some of you will join us to check it out. And then I mentioned also, we have an international newsletter, and I'm not seeing the link on here, but I can try to put it into the chat so you can sign up for our international newsletter and stay informed of the work that we're doing and research opportunities. And we'd love to have you join that mailing and stay connected with us. So that's all I have by way of prepared remarks, but I'm happy to answer any questions, and whatever I can't answer here, I will happily investigate and get back to you on.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Hoban. I'm a US citizen, and I had no idea of the breadth of the work that's being done. So thank you for sharing that with us. I suspect we will have some questions from our audience.
While we're waiting, I'm just going to pull up our international program newsletter so I can drop that link in the chat.
Thank you. Any questions from our researchers?
Yeah, thank you very much. My question is, when it comes to NIDA International Forum, there appears to be serious difficulty in getting grants through, because the restriction is that there must be exceptional, unusual information or unusual research you want to demonstrate that is outside the purview of the United States. So could you just tell us more about what you think may be unusual research? Because I for one, it's very difficult to get in studies in NIDA International Grant, maybe because of this restriction on unusual information that may be done outside the United States.
Yeah, I think it relates to opportunities or resources that are not available in the United States. So for example, if there is a country that is having maybe let's take harm reduction as a particular area of example. There are harm reduction practices that are supported in other countries of the world that are not supported currently in the United States. So within the United States, it is difficult to study those practices, right? Because they're not implemented. So that offers an opportunity in another country where researchers can study a novel practice that is not available in the United States, but which is important for us to know and can be informative to the United States. There might also be particular populations of people in the United States that maybe are using drugs in novel ways that we don't see in the United States. HIV, I think, is a big area of focus for for international grants. As I showed, I think about a third of our direct international grants are on HIV, and I think that speaks to some of the differences in the HIV AIDS epidemic in the United States versus in other countries where there are opportunities elsewhere that aren't available in the United States. So does that help a bit?
It definitely helped for me because the harm reduction stuff maybe in Europe is something that we might look at in the United States, right? They're doing more with that.
Well, right. Yeah, and just to sort of add to that, like for example, until recently, there were no supervised consumption sites in the United States. New York recently opened some, and there are some others poised to open in Rhode Island. So we've, for example, funded research in Canada to look at Canadian supervised consumption sites. There are other countries, for example, that use prescription heroin as a treatment for opioid use disorder. That's not something that we do in the United States. So that's, again, an area where we might fund research outside of the United States.
Really interesting. We have a note in the chat that says somebody would like the presentation to be shared. Thank you for asking for that. Dr. Hoban gave us permission to record, so I will share the link out with the group. And it sounds like she gave me permission to share the slides as well. So I will follow up later today with those for you.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you so much for this presentation. It has been a good presentation and has created awareness to all of us, especially we as scholars from the South. I just give an example. The last time I did my application, I realized that it needed for me to have a PI from the US. By the time I was putting up my application, getting a PI was not able. So the best thing was you can just submit, and now they can align your idea with someone who is based in the US. But now the challenge is, we scholars from the South, sometimes we do proposals. We have ideas that sometimes no one is interested from your side. So in the first place, you lose it out. Is there a way you could help us in linking us up with researchers who are now PI whom we can work with so that we increase our chances of getting funding? And at the same time, we need more of this training. Like now, I've come to realize that there's not much focus on alcohol-related research, but there is a lot on opioid and many other issues. You see, sometimes you develop such kind of proposal, but at the end of the day, it's not funded because of lack of knowledge. And I think this training has been a good exposure to us so that we are able to align our ideas to what NIDA requires. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. So two points there. One is for alcohol research, just specifically, I would look to the National Institute on Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism, and I can put the link to that institute in the chat. And NIAAA, as we call it, is the primary supporter of alcohol research within the United States and within the NIH. NIDA does research on all other drugs, and in fact, I used to work at NIAAA, and now I work at NIDA. In terms of the being able to help connect folks to current NIDA grantees or NIDA supported research, we're very happy to help with that. If you have an idea and you're looking for a US collaborator, there are sort of two things you can do. One is you can check out our reporter database. So if you're not familiar with it, I've just posted the link in the chat. And this is a database of all active NIH-funded grants for this year and past years, and it takes a little bit of work to kind of figure out how to click all the right boxes. But you can search for all active NIH grants in particular areas by particular year, and that'll give you a sense of the kind of work that we're supporting, but also link you directly to abstracts, to the investigator, to the institution, and might be a way to identify partners. The other thing I would suggest is reach out to us. If you have an idea and you're looking for a collaborator, I will take your description, and I will talk to the relevant program officer within NIDA that manages that portfolio and see if they have some suggestions that I can then relay to you. So we are very happy to help facilitate those connections, and really do encourage you to reach out.
Thank you. Maybe I
Thank
can
you.
ask again. Must I wait until there's a call for proposal, then I do something, or even if I have an idea now, I can always share so that we start looking for a collaborator?
I'm not sure I understood the question, Dr. Oino. Was it about when is the right time to reach out?
Yeah, is it the right time to reach out? Can I keep on reaching out even before I see a call for proposal?
Yes, I'm sorry, and I thought that was a comment. Absolutely, because the other thing I should mention is that although we have specific funding solicitations for specific areas of research, we also support research that's unsolicited. So grantees or applicants can come in with an idea at any point. I mean, it has to be tied to an overarching funding opportunity announcement, but those are quite general. So yeah, if you have an idea, something that you want to pursue, that's absolutely a time to reach out, and we can kind of figure out what opportunities may exist for you, or if there are particular researchers you should be talking to. Does that help?
Yeah, it helped.
Very good. Any other questions?
Yeah, I have a brief observational question.
Go ahead.
So I thank you so much, number one, for this nice presentation. It has been very insightful, and we have been looking forward to this kind of opportunities, because we know at one point we could reach some point, and we understand issues of drug abuse. Of course, they are global problems. They are just like Ebola or COVID-19. There are so much touchy issues. So number one, I take this opportunity to thank the team NIDA for what they have done so far. Number one, I want to observe does NIDA collaborate with other agencies like non-government organizations apart from universities, or as it was ICCDR, it is particularly with universities? You could find some other institutions and which have a gap, because for sure it is well known that we, as like my colleague has said, we are the South. We are disadvantaged in so many other areas in terms of capacity, in terms of resource, advocacy, and so forth. So the question is, do they partner, or are there opportunities with other like-minded organizations?
There are some opportunities. So we do support some grants to non-governmental organizations and that are not universities. Absolutely, it's not a huge part of what we do, but those opportunities do exist. And then beyond kind of research, we might support collaborations with such organizations. So for example, I mean, this is domestic, an NGO, if you will, but it's just what's coming to mind. For example, we do a lot of work with the U.S. Community Anti-Drug Coalitions of America, or CADCA, where we support the development of some materials that communications materials related to substance use and addiction for outreach to their community coalition. So we do have some opportunities. Our partnership with ICU DDR around this mini grant program is another opportunity. Those opportunities should also be searchable within the NIH reporter database. So you might kind of look for them in there, and you've got me curious too, because I don't have great examples for such international collaborations off the top of my head, but I'm gonna check and look. But the sort of bottom line is yes, it's a small part of what we do though.
Okay, thank you. I think I'm satisfied fully, and thank you for thank you.
Good.
Thank you. We have a few more minutes. Maybe we could take another question. I did take note of that website, and I'll send out the reporter.nih.gov. It sounds like that's a really good resource that folks will want to use.
Yeah, and I put the link into the chat there too.
Thank you.
So thank you very much, Jennifer, and thank you, Kali, for this idea. I think it's the greatest thing you thought about. I'm sorry I joined in late. I was caught up in another meeting, but I'm happy I was able to catch up, and I appreciate the presentation and the questions that my colleagues have asked, because they are valid for myself as well. And I would like to just ask one more question, that as NIDA, do you prefer to deal with individual researchers or institutional research? So for example, I have seen there are organizations that will prefer that a proposal is written by an organization rather than an individual, but we also have some that prefer an individual rather than an organization, or both. So what is the preference of NIDA? Thank you.
Our grants, so as I think you'll see from the reporter database, we solicit grants from individuals. Now they're affiliated with institutions, and so the grants technically are awarded to the institution, but we think of these are investigator initiated ideas that come from investigators, so not from their institutions.
Thank you for the clarification.
Jennifer, any final thoughts before we wrap up?
Not for me. I hope I gave you a sense of what we're interested in, and I'm happy to be a resource to any of you. So please feel free to reach out. And if I can't answer your question, then I'm sure somebody at NIDA can, and I'm happy to figure out who that is.
Very good. I wanted to say, you mentioned that this grant that most of the folks on the line are associated with is one of the ways that we were able to connect folks with a researcher in the United States. And so we want to learn from you. So if you are working with a US-based researcher and there's something that you need that we could maybe facilitate at ICU DDR, we don't have to wait until the end of this project. We'd like to hear, as we go along. And some of you have reached out to me, and we've tried to be really responsive. So thank you. And thank you to Dr. Hoban, who made some of those connections for us between researchers on the call and researchers in the US. And also a big thanks to NIDA for funding this so that we could learn more about the process, what works. So we appreciate it. Thank you so much, Dr. Hoban, for your time today.
Thank you, everybody, for your attention, and good luck with your research, and look forward, hopefully, to seeing some of you at the International Forum in June.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.